Neurips 2024 part 15. This paper is about evaluation. I think we're not spending enough time talking about the importance of eval. You hear it in presentations and seminars, and scientists talk about it a lot. But I feel like it's being a little bit sort of under the radar. Everything in AI, ever since the ImageNet revolution in 2012, is predicated on eval, because if you have a learned method of understanding, so in other words, if you skip priors, if you don't work with predefined rules or priors or any of that stuff, then you have to have proper eval methods in order to iterate properly. And this paper goes into that direction, and that's why we want to discuss it. The actual problem that they're attacking here is compositional reasoning of vision language models, which in itself, again, is a very important problem, because you could think about it this way. If you have a vision language model, it can probably depict the scene pretty well. So there's a book, there's a chair, there's a TV, there's a room, there's a person in the room. Compositional reasoning goes further and tries to understand the relationships between the nouns. So is the book on the table or under the table? Is the book larger than the table or smaller than the table? And so on and so forth. And that in itself is a problem in terms of benchmarking, because if you want to build a model that is better at compositional reasoning, you need to have better benchmarks for compositional reasoning, and that's exactly what this paper is tackling. They're creating a benchmark for compositional reasoning. Now, there's a couple of things to be said here. One is the methodology. The methodology is iteratively playing several vision language models and large language models against each other. So there's a vision language model and a large language model V, GPT-4V, which is a vision language model that recognizes, it's a large language model that recognizes images and describes images. So what the authors are doing is they iterate between different models, and they try to find holes and then use those created data sets as benchmarks. So instead of having priors, instead of having humans annotate the book is on top of the table or below the TV and things like that, you have basically an automated data generation pipeline. And so that's number one. Number two, they actually recognize, because they now have a more complex, more sophisticated benchmark, they also recognize that a lot of the vision language models actually don't have such good compositional reasoning, which is what they call the Achilles heel of vision language models. They don't have such good compositional reasoning. And this brings us to a, I think, more interesting conversation as far as we're concerned, because we're looking at robotics and real-world AI, and we're thinking about the application of vision language models in, let's say, FSD, Tesla, to add more semantics to the robot. And while some of it is very interesting, I guess there's a philosophical question here, which is, if a vision language model is able to segment between different nouns, so it knows what a book is, it knows what a person is, it knows what the street is, but it doesn't have good compositional reasoning, then in terms of real-world robotics, its usefulness actually is pretty limited, right? If the model doesn't really understand that the person is in front of a car, and that means that the car can get closer to the person if it goes in one direction, but gets further away from the person, it goes in the other direction. If the robot doesn't understand these nuanced things, then the semantics that we think the robot understands are actually not so useful. So that would be the equivalent of maybe you could I don't know, I can't think of a much better example, but like when I order an espresso, let's say in Italy, it's pretty clear what's going to happen, right? They're going to make an espresso. They're going to put a little plate under the espresso cup. They're going to put a little spoon on it and give you some sugar. And when you do the same thing, let's say in the US, in a fancy Italian coffee shop, but the employee doesn't understand coffee, doesn't have that concept, and she stands in front of the coffee cup, the plates and the spoons, but just doesn't understand that they belong together. As a customer, you're kind of put off. You're like, well, you're charging me $5 for an espresso in this fancy Lavazza coffee shop. You don't even understand that, you know, I need to have a little, let's say, spoon to stir the sugar. That's kind of the way I feel sometimes. So, like, the people have, like, the segmentations are clear, the semantics are clear, but then the understanding or the compositional reasoning actually is totally unclear because the person doesn't understand what espresso actually means. So in that context, I can see how vision language models can mislead us to have a lot more understanding than they actually do. And what Trevor and et al. Are doing in this paper is trying to improve that by building a benchmark and evaluating. So to summarize, I think this is a very good example of the importance of eval and eval in general, but also specifically now for vision language models. If we want to have better semantics in vision language models, if we want computer vision to be useful in particular for real-world robotics, we need to have better compositional reasoning, because otherwise it's even misleading if we think that the machine understands the difference between a book and a TV, but then it doesn't have, it doesn't understand the book is smaller than a TV, or the book is lighter than a TV, or things like that, then maybe it's not, it's actually misleading. So better benchmarks are important. The question of how to build them is being addressed in this paper, and also the solution is being offered, and most importantly also they show that current vision language models actually outperform against benchmarks, but that's not because the models are good, but the benchmarks are not so good. Thank you.